The late autumn wind howled through the jagged peaks of the Colorado Rockies, carrying with it the promise of an early winter. Dust devils danced across the barren valley below, where the last stubborn patches of sagebrush clung to life in the unforgiving soil. This was country that broke men's spirits as easily as it broke their bodies, a land where the weak perished and even the strong merely survived. Ezra Hawthorne had made his peace with this harsh mistress years ago. His cabin, built from pine logs he'd felled himself, sat nestled in a grove of aspens 3 miles up the mountain from the nearest excuse for civilization, a ramshackle collection of buildings that dared call itself Copper Creek. The isolation suited him fine. In the 5 years since he'd buried his wife and daughter beneath the old cottonwood by the stream, he'd found that solitude was the only companion that didn't remind him of what he'd lost. On this particular morning, Ezra descended the mountain trail on his mule, Winchester rifle across his lap and saddlebags empty save for a small pouch of silver coins. His monthly trip to town was a necessity he endured rather than enjoyed. Salt, coffee, ammunition, and perhaps a bottle of whiskey if his funds allowed. These were the extent of his needs. He had no use for the gossip and sideways glances that came free with every purchase. The sun climbed higher as he picked his way down the treacherous path, his breath visible in the crisp air. Below, Copper Creek sprawled like a festering wound against the landscape. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from this distance, he could hear the tinny notes of a poorly played piano drifting from the saloon. Ezra tied his mule outside Morrison's general store and conducted his business with characteristic brevity. Old Morrison, accustomed to the mountain man's taciturn ways, filled his order without attempting conversation. With his supplies secured, Ezra should have headed straight back to his sanctuary, but the whiskey called to him, not from thirst, but from habit. One drink to steel himself for the journey home. One drink to quiet the ghosts that seemed louder in town than they ever were in his cabin. The Broken Wheel Saloon was exactly what one would expect from a frontier drinking establishment. Sawdust covered the floor, absorbing spilled beer and blood with equal indifference. The air hung thick with tobacco smoke and the sour smell of unwashed bodies. Ezra pushed through the batwing doors and made his way to the far end of the bar, keeping his back to the wall, an old habit that had saved his life more than once. He was nursing his second whiskey when the commotion started. $20! The voice was slurred, desperate. $20 and she's yours. Ezra's jaw tightened. He'd heard this particular brand of desperation before. Some fool had drunk away his stake and was now trying to sell whatever he had left. Usually it was a saddle, sometimes a gun. He kept his eyes on his glass, determined not to get involved. Come on now. Someone must need help around their place. She's a good girl, strong for her age. The words penetrated Ezra's whiskey-dulled consciousness like ice water. Slowly, he turned to look at the source of the disturbance. A man stood near the poker tables, swaying on his feet. His clothes marked him as a farmer, patched overalls, worn boots, the permanent stoop of someone who'd spent too many years behind a plow. But it was what stood beside him that made Ezra's blood run cold. A girl, no more than 8 or 9 years old, stood with her thin shoulders hunched and her eyes fixed on the floor. Her dress, once blue, had faded to the color of winter sky. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands around a face that was all sharp angles and hollow cheeks. She clutched a small cloth bundle to her chest as if it contained all the worldly possessions she had, which it probably did. She can cook, clean, tend animals, the farmer continued, his words running together. Just need enough for a horse. Can't work my claim without a horse. The saloon had gone quiet. Even the piano player had stopped his assault on the keys. Men looked away, uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. This wasn't the first time poverty had driven someone to such extremes, and it wouldn't be the last. That's your daughter, Silas, someone said quietly. You can't what? The farmer, Silas, whirled unsteadily. Can't what? Can't feed her? Can't keep a roof over her head? You offering to help Tom? No? Then shut your mouth. Ezra's grip on his glass tightened until his knuckles went white. The scene before him blurred with memories he'd tried so hard to bury. Another man, another time. making the same devil's bargain. His own father, selling his sister to pay gambling debts. The way she'd looked at him as the stranger led her away. Pleading, terrified, betrayed. He'd been too young then, too weak, too scared. Not now. "I'll take her." The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Every head in the saloon turned to stare at the mountain man who rarely spoke more than 3 words at a time. Silas blinked, trying to focus. "You... what?" Ezra stood, his considerable height unfolding from the bar stool. "I said I'll take her. $20. He reached into his coat and pulled out the silver coins, counting them onto the bar with deliberate precision. $20, nearly all he had, enough for a horse. Yes, enough for a man to convince himself he hadn't just sold his own flesh and blood. "Well now," Silas said, a grotesque smile spreading across his face. "Seems we got ourselves a deal, Mr. Hawthorne." Ezra moved toward them, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Up close, he could see the girl trembling, though whether from cold or fear he couldn't tell. Probably both. "You hear that, Emma?" Silas grabbed the girl's shoulder, shaking her slightly. "This man's gonna take care of you now. You be good for him. You hear?" The girl, Emma, finally looked up. Her eyes were the color of mountain lakes, clear and deep and filled with a pain no child should know. She looked at her father, then at Ezra, then back at her father. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. "Here." Silas pushed her forward. "She's yours." The transaction complete. Silas snatched the money from the bar and headed for the door, stumbling in his haste to leave before conscience or onlookers could interfere. He didn't look back, not once. Ezra stood there, suddenly unsure what to do. He'd acted on instinct, on memory, on a rage he thought he'd buried with his family. Now he had a child looking up at him with those haunted eyes, and he had no idea what came next. "Come on," he said gruffly, his voice rusty from disuse. "Let's get out of here." He turned and walked toward the door, not waiting to see if she followed. After a moment, he heard the soft shuffle of her worn shoes on the sawdust. Outside, the afternoon sun seemed too bright, too normal for what had just transpired. Ezra loaded his supplies onto the mule, acutely aware of the small figure standing a few feet away. What was he thinking? He could barely take care of himself. His cabin was no place for a child. He should take her to the church, let them find a proper family. But when he looked at her, saw the way she stood as if ready to bolt at any moment, he knew he couldn't. Someone had failed this child. Many someones. He wouldn't add his name to that list. "You ever ridden a mule?" he asked. She shook her head. "Well, come on then. Long walk ahead if we're going to make it before dark." He lifted her onto the mule's back, surprised by how little she weighed. She sat stiffly, clearly terrified of falling but too proud or too scared to ask for help. "Hold on to the saddle horn," he instructed, adjusting the supplies to give her more room. "Bessie here is steady. She won't let you fall." They left Copper Creek as the shadows began to lengthen, man and child and mule making their slow way up the mountain path. Ezra walked ahead, leading Bessie by her rope, his rifle now slung across his back. Behind him, Emma rode in silence, her small hands white-knuckled around the saddle horn. The first mile passed without a word, the second as well. It wasn't until they stopped to rest at a small spring that Ezra realized he had no idea how to talk to a child. His own daughter had been barely 3 when the fever took her. This girl was older, shaped by hardships he could only guess at. "There's water," he said unnecessarily, gesturing to the spring, "if you're thirsty." She slid down from the mule carefully and approached the spring like a wary animal. She cupped water in her hands and drank, then splashed some on her face. When she was done, she returned to stand by the mule, still clutching her bundle. "What's in there?" Ezra asked, nodding to the bundle. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "My mama's handkerchief and a piece of cornbread. When did you eat last?" A shrug. Ezra reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a piece of jerky. It wasn't much, but it was what he had. "Here, She took it hesitantly, as if expecting him to snatch it back. When he didn't, she bit into it, chewing slowly to make it last. They continued on as the sun began its descent behind the western peaks. The temperature dropped quickly at this elevation, and Ezra noticed Emma shivering. Without a word, he removed his coat and draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her small frame, hanging down past the mule's belly, but it would keep her warm. The trail grew steeper, more treacherous. In places, Ezra had to guide Bessie carefully around washouts and fallen trees. All the while, his mind raced. What had he done? How could he care for this child when he'd failed so spectacularly with his own family? But each time doubt crept in. He remembered his sister's face, remembered standing frozen as she was led away, remembered finding her body 3 years later in a Denver brothel, disease and despair having claimed what innocence hadn't already destroyed. He wouldn't let that happen again. Not to this girl, not on his watch. The cabin came into view just as the last rays of sunlight painted the peaks crimson. It looked even smaller and more isolated than usual, a lonely outpost against the vastness of the mountains. "This is it," Ezra said, helping Emma down from the mule. Home. She stood there, his coat pooling around her feet, looking at the cabin with those unreadable blue eyes. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, gathering her bundle close, she took a small step toward the door. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a beginning. The cabin's interior was Spartan, shaped by years of solitary living. A single room served all purposes: kitchen, bedroom, and living space rolled into one. The stone fireplace dominated one wall, cold now but bearing the blackened evidence of countless fires. A narrow bed occupied one corner, a rough-hewn table and 2 chairs another. Dust motes danced in the fading light that filtered through the single window. Ezra moved with practiced efficiency, starting a fire in the hearth. The dry kindling caught quickly, and soon orange flames were licking at the larger logs. Warmth began to seep into the cold space, pushing back the mountain chill that had settled into the bones of the cabin. Emma stood just inside the doorway, still wrapped in his oversized coat, watching his every movement with those careful eyes. She reminded him of the wild creatures that sometimes ventured near his cabin, ready to flee at the slightest provocation. "You can sit," he said, gesturing to one of the chairs. "I'll fix us something to eat." She moved to the chair slowly, perching on its edge as if she might need to run at any moment. Her bundle remained clutched to her chest, a talisman against the unknown. Ezra's food stores were basic: salt pork, beans, hardtack, and a few withered potatoes from his small garden. He set about preparing a simple meal, aware of the girl's eyes following his movements. The familiar routine of cooking calmed his nerves somewhat. This he knew how to do. This didn't require words or understanding or any of the things he'd lost practice with. He divided the meager portions between 2 tin plates, giving her the larger share without comment. She stared at the food as if she'd never seen beans and pork before. "Go on," he said. "It's not fancy, but it'll fill your belly." She picked up the fork hesitantly, taking small, careful bites. He noticed she kept glancing at him between mouthfuls, as if expecting him to take the food away. How long had it been since she'd had a proper meal? Days? Weeks? They ate in silence. The only sounds, the crackling of the fire and the wind beginning to pick up outside. When she'd cleaned her plate, he wordlessly gave her half of his remaining portion. This time, she looked up at him, and for just a moment, something flickered in those guarded eyes. Not quite gratitude, more like surprise. After the meal, Ezra cleared the plates and added more wood to the fire. The temperature was dropping fast outside. He could hear ice forming in the rainwater barrel by the door. He'd need to figure out sleeping arrangements. The cabin had only one bed, and while he'd slept on the floor plenty of times in his life, he couldn't ask a child to do the same. "You'll take the bed," he said, his voice sounding overloud in the quiet cabin. "I'll make a pallet by the fire." He busied himself gathering blankets, trying to create some semblance of comfort on the hard floor. When he turned back, He found Emma had moved from the chair to a corner of the room, pressed against the wall with her bundle held tight. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer, just pressed herself further into the corner. In the flickering firelight, he could see her trembling, not from cold this time, but from fear, raw, bone-deep fear. Understanding hit him like a physical blow. Of course she was afraid. She'd been sold by her own father to a stranger, a large, gruff mountain man who'd taken her to an isolated cabin miles from anywhere. In her mind, what came next? Ezra felt sick. Slowly, carefully, he lowered himself to sit on the floor, making himself smaller, less threatening. "Emma," he said quietly, "I need you to listen to me. Can you do that?" A tiny nod. "I'm not going to hurt you, understand? Not ever. You're safe here." She remained pressed against the wall, but her eyes were on him now, searching his face for truth or lies. "I had a daughter once," he continued, the words coming hard. "Sarah, she was just a baby when—" He swallowed. "When she died, her and her mother both, fever took them 5 winters ago." Why was he telling her this? He'd never spoken of it to anyone, but something about this frightened child in his cabin demanded truth. "I bought you from your PA because I couldn't stand to see what I saw. No child should be sold like livestock, but I'm not. I don't want anything from you except maybe to see you fed and safe. That's all." The silence stretched between them. Then, in a voice so small he almost missed it, "Are you going to sell me like Papa?" The words hit him like a mule kick to the chest. His vision blurred, and suddenly he was crying. Great, gasping sobs that he'd held inside for 5 years. He turned his face away, ashamed of his weakness, but unable to stop the flood once it had started. "No," he managed between breaths. "Never. You hear me? Never." When he finally regained control, wiping his face with rough hands, he found Emma had moved slightly away from the wall. Still wary, still ready to run. But something had shifted. "You can have the bed," she whispered. "No, it's yours. I've slept on harder ground than this. I don't—" She stopped, started again. "I usually sleep in the barn, with the animals, when Papa remembered to unlock it." Jesus Christ. Ezra closed his eyes, fighting down a fresh wave of anger. What kind of man locks his child in a barn? What kind of man sells her for horse money? "You'll never sleep in a barn again," he said firmly. "The bed is yours, every night, warm and safe." She crept toward the bed like she expected it to be snatched away. When she reached it, she touched the blanket reverently, as if she'd never felt anything so soft, which, Ezra realized, she probably hadn't. "I'll be right here by the fire," he said. "Door's barred. Nobody can get in. You can sleep." She climbed onto the bed fully clothed, still clutching her bundle. For a long time, she lay rigid, eyes wide open and staring at the rafters. Ezra settled onto his makeshift pallet, trying to give her space while maintaining his promise to keep watch. The fire burned lower, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf called to its pack. Emma startled at the sound. "Just wolves," Ezra said. "They don't come near the cabin. Too scared of the smell of smoke and men. Papa said wolves would eat me if I ran away." "Your papa said a lot of things that weren't true." Silence fell again. Then, "My mama died 2 summers ago. Papa said it was my fault, said I ate too much, cost too much, and she worked herself to death trying to feed me." Ezra's hands clenched into fists. "That's a lie. Emma, whatever happened to your mama, it wasn't your fault. Men like your papa, they look for someone else to blame for their troubles. Usually pick on those who can't fight back. He wasn't always mean," she said, and there was something heartbreaking about her need to defend the man who'd sold her. "Before Mama died, sometimes he'd whistle, and once he carved me a wooden horse. Grief does strange things to people, but it doesn't excuse what he did." She was quiet for so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, "What was your girl like, Sarah?" The question caught him off guard. "She was bright, like sunshine, laughed at everything. Her mama said she got that from me, though I don't recall being much for laughter even then. She had these little hands. He held up his own massive paw. Could wrap her whole fist around one of my fingers. Held on tight, like she was afraid I'd disappear if she let go. Did you sing to her? Her mama did. Mary had a voice like a meadowlark. Used to sing hymns while she worked. Sarah would watch her with these big eyes, trying to follow along even before she could talk. My mama sang too, in the sweet by and by. Do you know that one? Ezra nodded, though she couldn't see it in the dark. I know it. Would you? I don't sing, child. Voice like mine would scare the wolves away for sure. A tiny sound escaped her, not quite a laugh, but close. The first positive sound he'd heard from her. Maybe you could just say the words. Ezra stared at the dying embers of the fire. When was the last time he'd thought of those old hymns? Mary singing while she kneaded bread. Sarah on a blanket nearby, gurgling happily. A life that seemed to belong to someone else, now. There's a land that is fairer than day, he began, his voice rough but steady. And by faith we can see it afar, for the Father waits over the way, to prepare us a dwelling place there. He continued through the verses he could remember, speaking them like a prayer or a promise, somewhere during the second verse. Emma's breathing deepened and steadied. By the third, she was asleep. Ezra lay awake long into the night, listening to the child's breathing, to the wind, to the settling of the cabin. He'd acted on instinct in that saloon, driven by ghosts and guilt. Now he had a living fool, breathing responsibility curled up in his bed, and he had no idea how to be what she needed. But he'd figure it out. He'd failed his own family, failed to protect them from fever and fate. He wouldn't fail this child. Whatever it took, whatever she needed, he'd provide. It was a debt he owed. Not to her, maybe, but to Sarah, to Mary, to his sister, to every child who'd ever looked to an adult for protection and found only betrayal. The fire died to embers, then ash. Still, Ezra kept watch, guardian of a trust he was only beginning to understand. Outside, snow began to fall, the first of the season, blanketing the harsh mountain landscape in temporary softness. And inside the cabin, for the first time in 5 years, 2 people slept under the same roof, one finding safety at last, the other finding purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. He'd need to get her proper clothes, figure out how to cut her tangled hair, teach her the ways of mountain living. There would be questions from town, suspicions to navigate, a traumatized child to somehow heal. But for tonight, it was enough that she slept peacefully, no longer in a barn, no longer hungry, no longer for sale. It was enough that he'd kept his promise, the first of many he intended to keep. The wolves called again in the distance, but Emma didn't stir, safe in the cabin's warmth, protected by the man who'd sworn never to sell her, never to hurt her, never to abandon her. She slept on, and Ezra kept his vigil, watching over her as he'd once watched over another child, in another life, when he still believed the world could be kind. The first snows of winter had given way to spring thaw, and with it came a transformation in the small cabin on the mountainside. What had begun as an awkward arrangement between a grief-stricken man and a frightened child had slowly evolved into something resembling a family routine. Emma proved to be a quick study. Within weeks, she was helping with the daily chores that mountain life demanded. She learned to carry water from the stream without spilling, her thin arms growing stronger with each trip. She mastered the art of keeping the fire banked through the night, ensuring the cabin stayed warm during the bitter cold snaps that still gripped the high country. "Hold the axe lower," Ezra instructed one crisp morning, watching as she attempted to split kindling. "Let the weight of the head do the work." She adjusted her grip, bringing the small hatchet down with more control. The wood split cleanly, and a rare smile crossed her face. "Good, now stack it with the others. We'll need plenty before the next storm." She worked without complaint, though Ezra could see the blisters forming on her small hands. That evening, He showed her how to treat them with bear grease and wrap them in clean cloth. "My hands will get tough like yours?" she asked, examining his calloused palms. "In time. Everything takes time up here." The lessons extended beyond mere chores. Ezra taught her to read the weather and the movement of clouds, the behavior of birds, the smell of the wind. He showed her how to identify tracks in the snow, rabbit, deer, elk, and the more dangerous signs of bear and mountain lion. "See here?" He knelt beside a clear print in the mud near the stream. "Mountain cat, female, by the size, probably has kittens somewhere nearby." Emma studied the track intently. "How do you know it's female?" "Males are bigger, heavier, their pads spread wider. This one's moving careful, hunting small game. Mothers with young to feed don't take big risks." She absorbed these lessons with the intensity of someone who understood that knowledge meant survival, unlike town children who learned their letters for the abstract promise of betterment. Emma learned because ignorance in the mountains could mean death. The transformation wasn't just in skills. Slowly, carefully, she began to emerge from the shell of fear she'd worn like armor. She no longer flinched when he moved suddenly. She started asking questions, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. "Why do you live up here alone?" she asked one evening as they cleaned rabbit pelts. Ezra considered his answer. "Wasn't always alone. After my family died, town felt too crowded, too many memories. Mountains don't ask questions, don't judge, just demand honest work. Do you miss them? Your family?" "Every day." She nodded, understanding loss in a way no child should. "I miss my mama, not Papa. Is that wrong?" "Nothing wrong about it. We miss the people who were kind to us. That's natural." Summer brought new challenges and opportunities. The mountain burst into life, wildflowers carpeting the meadows, streams swollen with snowmelt, game plentiful. Ezra taught Emma to set snares for rabbits, to identify edible plants from poisonous ones, to fish the cold mountain streams. "Patience," he murmured as she held the homemade rod, fighting the urge to jerk at every ripple. "Fish are smarter than they look. Wait for the real bite." When she finally landed her first trout, a small rainbow that flashed silver in the sunlight, her whoop of triumph echoed off the canyon walls. That night, she cleaned and cooked it herself, presenting it to him with pride that made his chest tight. "Best fish I ever ate," he said, and meant it. But the lessons that mattered most were the ones about defending herself. Ezra had lived too long in rough country to harbor illusions about the goodness of men. Emma's own history was proof enough that danger didn't always come from wolves or bears. He started with basics: how to handle a knife, where to strike if grabbed, how to use her small size as an advantage rather than a weakness. "A man expects another man to fight straight on," he explained, demonstrating a defensive stance. "But you're small, quick, use that. Go for the knees, the soft parts. Then run. Always run. Get to the cabin, bar the door, and don't open it for anyone but me." She practiced with the serious concentration of someone who'd already learned that the world could be cruel. When he gave her a small knife of her own, good steel with a bone handle that fit her grip, she treated it with the reverence most girls reserved for dolls. "What if someone comes when you're gone?" she asked. "Then you do what I taught you. And if you can't get to the cabin, you hide. These mountains are full of hiding spots. I'll show you the best ones." He taught her about the cave system higher up the mountain, the hollow tree that looked solid from outside, the rock formations that created natural shelters. Each location was stocked with basic supplies: blankets, dried food, water, ammunition for the small rifle he was teaching her to shoot. The rifle lessons were perhaps the most important. At first, the .22 caliber seemed enormous in her small hands, but she was determined to master it. "Steady," Ezra coached as she sighted down the barrel at a target he'd set up, a piece of bark with charcoal circles. "Breathe out slow, squeeze gentle, don't jerk." The crack of the rifle sent birds fleeing from nearby trees. Her shot went wide, but she immediately adjusted, ready to try again. Good, you didn't flinch. That's half the battle. By late summer, she could hit the target more often than not, and had even brought down a rabbit for the pot, though the pride on her face was mixed with sadness for the creature. It's all right to feel sorry for it, Ezra told her as she helped clean the game. Shows you've got a good heart, but out here, we take what we need to survive. No more. We use everything we can. Waste nothing. That's how we honor what dies to keep us alive. The real test of her training came unexpectedly on a day in early autumn. Ezra had gone to check his trap lines, leaving Emma to tend the cabin. He'd been gone maybe 2 hours when he heard the shot, a single crack from the .22 echoing down the mountain. He ran, fear lending speed to his legs. A dozen scenarios flashed through his mind, each worse than the last. When he burst into the clearing around the cabin, rifle ready, he found Emma standing on the porch, the smoking .22 in her hands, and a very surprised black bear lumbering away into the forest. "It was trying to get into the root cellar," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I remembered what you said. Fire over their heads first. Scare them off." Ezra felt his knees go weak with relief. "You did good, Emma. You did real good." That night, she sat closer to him by the fire than usual, the day's excitement catching up with her. "I was scared," she admitted quietly. "Be foolish not to be. Bear's nothing to take lightly. But you kept your head, did what needed doing. That's what matters." Would you have shot it if it didn't leave? If it threatened you, without hesitation? She absorbed this, understanding flowing between them without need for more words. The mountains were beautiful, but unforgiving. Sometimes hard choices had to be made, but you made them to protect what mattered, and somewhere along the way, without either of them quite realizing when, they'd become what mattered to each other. As autumn deepened, bringing with it the promise of another hard winter, Ezra watched Emma move about the cabin with growing confidence. She'd filled out some, no longer the skeleton wrapped in rags he'd brought home that day. Her hair, once tangled and dull, shone with health after patient grooming and proper food. More than that, though, was the change in her eyes. The haunted look remained, some wounds never fully healed, but it was joined now by something else. Trust, purpose, maybe even happiness. "Storm coming," she announced one evening, reading the signs in the sky as well as he could. "Big one, by the look of those clouds. Then we'd best get ready." He agreed, pride warming his chest. They worked together to prepare, bringing in extra wood, checking the roof for loose spots, ensuring their food stores were secure. As they worked, Emma hummed tunelessly, a sound that still caught him by surprise. It had taken months before she felt safe enough to make unnecessary noise. The storm hit that night with a fury that shook the cabin walls. Wind howled like a living thing, driving snow horizontal past the windows. But inside, the fire crackled cheerfully, and two people who'd found salvation in each other's company settled in to wait it out. "Tell me about the place where your people came from," Emma asked, a ritual that had developed over the months. "Before the mountains." So Ezra told her about Virginia, about green hills and tobacco fields, about a way of life that seemed as distant now as the moon. She listened with the rapt attention of someone storing up stories against future need, building a history beyond the harsh reality of her early years. When the wind grew too loud for talking, they simply sat in companionable silence. Emma worked on patching one of Ezra's shirts, her stitches growing neater with practice, while he sharpened tools for the winter ahead. Two people who'd been broken by loss, slowly learning to be whole again. The storm would pass, as all storms did. Winter would come with its challenges, and down in Copper Creek, whispers about the mountain man and his purchased child would continue to circulate, growing darker with each telling. But for now, in this moment, they were safe, they were warm, they were together, and for two souls who'd known too much of cold and loneliness, that was enough. The knock came at dawn, sharp and authoritative against the cabin door. Ezra was already awake, had been since he'd heard the horses picking their way up the trail. Mountain living taught a man to sleep light. "Emma," he said quietly, touching her shoulder. "Get dressed. We've got company." She came awake instantly. The wariness of her early life never fully faded despite months of safety. Her eyes went immediately to the rifle by the door, but Ezra shook his head. "Not that kind of trouble, but stay back." He opened the door to find Sheriff Tom Garrett standing on his porch, accompanied by two men Ezra recognized from town, Claude Morrison from the general store and Isaac Hartley, who fancied himself a moral guardian of Copper Creek. "Sheriff," Ezra nodded, keeping his body blocking the doorway. "Early for a social call." Garrett, a weathered man who'd kept order in mining towns for longer than most, looked uncomfortable. "This ain't social. Hawthorne, mind if we come in?" "I do mind. State your business here." Hartley pushed forward, his face red with righteous anger. "You know damn well why we're here. That girl." "Careful." Ezra's voice dropped low. "Dangerous. Choose your words real careful." "Hartley." The sheriff put a restraining hand on Hartley's arm. "We've had complaints. Hawthorne, concerns about the child's welfare. People are talking. People always talk, especially when they've got nothing better to do." "This is different," Morrison spoke up, though he wouldn't meet Ezra's eyes. "A man living alone with a young girl? No relation? No. Proper supervision. It doesn't look right." "And what would look right to you?" Ezra asked. "Leaving her with a father who sold her for drinking money? Maybe you'd have preferred she ended up with whoever else had $20 that day." "That's not," Hartley started. "What, not your problem? Wasn't your problem when Silas Kane was stumbling drunk every day while his girl went hungry? Wasn't your problem when he locked her in the barn? But now that she's fed and safe, suddenly you're all concerned citizens." Emma appeared at his elbow, dressed but barefoot, her small face set in stubborn lines. "I want to stay here," she said clearly. "Mr. Hawthorne takes good care of me." Hartley's eyes narrowed. "Of course you'd say that. He's probably threatened—" The words died as Ezra took a step forward. The sheriff quickly intervened. "Nobody's accusing anybody of anything, but you understand. Hawthorne, we have to look into these things. It's my job." "Then do your job," Ezra said. "Look around, ask your questions, but then leave us be." Garrett nodded, seeming relieved by the cooperation. "The girl healthy? Getting enough to eat?" "I eat better than I ever did before," Emma said before Ezra could answer. 3 times a day, and meat with most meals." "And he's teaching you letters and such." Emma disappeared inside and returned with a slate covered in carefully formed letters and simple sums. "We practice every evening. I can read from the Bible now, and Mr. Hawthorne's teaching me to figure accounts." Morrison examined the slate, surprise evident on his face. This is good work. Better than most town children." The sheriff agreed. He looked at Ezra with new consideration. "You were educated before you came to the mountains." "My mother was a school teacher. Insisted all her children learn proper—" "And the girls' sleeping arrangements?" Hartley pressed, clearly unsatisfied with the direction of the investigation. Ezra's jaw clenched, but Emma answered calmly. "I have my own bed, mister. Hawthorne sleeps by the fire. He's never—" She paused, then lifted her chin. "He's never been anything but kind. The first night, I was scared, and he told me about his daughter who died. He cried." The admission hung in the air. Men didn't cry, especially not men like Ezra Hawthorne. The fact that this child had witnessed it seemed to shift something in the atmosphere. "Can I show them my things?" Emma asked Ezra. At his nod, she led the men inside. The cabin was clean, organized, clearly a home rather than just a shelter. Emma's corner contained her bed, neatly made, with a small trunk Ezra had built for her belongings. She opened it proudly, showing the new dress he'd had Mrs. Patterson make, her winter coat, the books he'd bought for her education, and this, she said, pulling out the knife he'd given her. "For protection. He taught me to use it proper, and the rifle too, Says a person needs to be able to take care of themselves. You let her handle weapons? Hartley sounded scandalized. This is mountain country, Ezra said flatly. Bears, cats, wolves. They don't care if you're 8 or 80. She needs to know how to protect herself. Show them your targets, Emma suggested, and led the way outside to where her practice targets were set up. The groupings were impressive for anyone, let alone a child. Sheriff Garrett whistled low. That's some fine shooting. She's a natural, Ezra said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. Steady hand, good eye. They toured the rest of the small homestead, the root cellar stocked with preserves and smoked meat, the woodshed with enough split logs to last the winter, the small garden plot already turned for spring planting. You've done well, buyer, Morrison admitted grudgingly. I can see that. But Hartley wasn't finished. It's still not proper. A girl needs a woman's influence, needs to be around other children, needs proper Christian guidance. I read the Bible to her every Sunday, Ezra interrupted. She knows her prayers. As for other children, you're welcome to send your own young ones up here to play, if you're so concerned about her social education. The offer was met with uncomfortable silence. No one would send their children up the mountain to the hermit's cabin, and they all knew it. What about school? The sheriff asked. Come spring, she should be in the schoolhouse with the other youngsters. I've thought on that, Ezra admitted. Been preparing her for it. Come spring thaw, I'll bring her down regular for schooling. You will? Emma looked up at him, surprised. But the other children? Will learn to treat you proper, or answer to me, Ezra said firmly. The sheriff nodded, satisfied. That's all I needed to hear. Morrison, you got any other concerns? The shopkeeper shook his head, looking ashamed of his participation in the investigation. But Hartley remained stubborn. This isn't over, he declared. That child needs a proper home, with good Christian folk like you. Ezra's voice was deadly quiet. Tell me, Hartley, where were you in your Christian charity when her father was selling her? Where was your proper home then? That's different. No, it's not. You didn't want the burden then, and you don't want it now. You just want to feel righteous about something. Well, find another cause. This child stays with me. Emma slipped her hand into Ezra's, a gesture that wasn't lost on the sheriff. I think we've seen enough, Garrett said. The child is healthy, educated, and cared for, unless someone has evidence of actual wrongdoing, not just gossip and speculation. I see no cause for interference. You'll regret this, Hartley warned. When something happens, the only thing that's going to happen, the sheriff cut him off, is you're going to leave these folks alone. That's an order. Isaac, official-like. As the men prepared to leave, Emma stepped forward. Mr. Hartley, I want to thank you. The man looked taken aback. Thank me. Yes, sir. For caring enough to check on me. Even if you were wrong about Mr. Hawthorne, it's good to know folks are watching out for children. Maybe if more people paid attention like you're doing now, my papa couldn't have sold me in the first place. The words were delivered with childish innocence, but they hit like hammers. Hartley flushed deep red, mumbled something incoherent, and hurried to his horse. Sheriff Garrett lingered a moment longer. She's a smart one, he said quietly to Ezra. You're doing right by her. Anyone can see that, but Hartley's not the only one with concerns. There'll be more talk, more trouble. I know. Bringing her to school regular will help. Let folks see her, see how she's thriving. Fear grows in darkness. Shed some light on it. After they'd gone, Emma remained quiet, standing beside Ezra on the porch as they watched the riders disappear down the trail. You don't have to send me to school, she said finally. I can learn everything here. No, the sheriff's right. You need to know more than what I can teach. And you need to learn to deal with people, even the ones who whisper and point. They'll be mean. Some will, but you're tougher than they know. You've survived worse than words. She leaned against him, just slightly, a trust that still caught him by surprise. What if they try to take me away? Then they'll have to go through me. And Emma, I'm not easy to go through. She smiled at that, small but real. I know. That's why I told them about you crying. So they'd know you're not just tough. You're good, too. They stood together as the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the clearing. The visit had been a warning. Ezra knew. The town's scrutiny would only increase, especially when Emma started attending school. There would be more questions, more accusations, more attempts to separate them. But as he looked down at the girl who'd become his purpose, his redemption, his daughter in all but blood, Ezra felt ready for whatever came. He'd failed to protect his family once. He wouldn't fail again. Come on, he said. Let's get some breakfast. Then we'll practice your letters. If you're going to show those town children what mountain learning looks like, we'd best make sure you're ready. Emma grinned, the shadows of the morning's confrontation already fading from her young face. Together they went inside, leaving the judgment of the valley behind, safe for now in their mountain sanctuary. Winter came early that year, fierce and unforgiving. By November, snow lay 3 feet deep around the cabin, with drifts reaching the windows on the north side. The mountain passes became treacherous, cutting them off from Copper Creek more thoroughly than any locked door. For Ezra, who'd weathered many such winters alone, the isolation posed no great hardship. But this year was different. This year, he had Emma to think about, and their food stores, while adequate for one, would be stretched thin for two. We'll need to be careful, he explained as they took inventory of the root cellar. No waste, smaller portions when we can manage. The dried meat should last if we supplement with what I can trap. Emma nodded solemnly, understanding the mathematics of survival better than most children her age. I don't need much, she offered. I'm used to being hungry. You won't be hungry, Ezra said firmly. Not while I draw breath. We'll manage. The first weeks passed well enough. Ezra's trap lines yielded rabbit and the occasional grouse. Emma proved adept at making stews that stretched their ingredients, adding pine needles for vitamins as he'd taught her, using every scrap of meat and bone. But then the real cold set in. Temperatures plummeted until even breathing outside became painful. The wolves, driven by their own hunger, grew bolder. Their howls came closer each night, circling the cabin like gray ghosts. They're hunting, Ezra said one evening, loading extra shells for the rifle. Game's scarce. They're desperate. Emma peered out the frost-covered window into the darkness. Would they attack people? Not usual, but this isn't a usual winter. 2 nights later, they got their answer. Ezra woke to the sound of scratching at the door, followed by low growls that raised the hair on his neck. Through the window, he could see yellow eyes reflecting the moonlight. 6, 8, maybe more wolves prowling around the cabin. Stay in bed, he told Emma quietly, reaching for the rifle. Don't make a sound. But she was already up, her own small rifle in hand. I can help. No, this is... A heavy body slammed against the door, making the bar rattle. Another wolf had climbed the wood pile and was pawing at the roof, looking for weakness. All right, Ezra conceded. But you do exactly as I say. We're going to scare them off, not start a war. They positioned themselves at opposite windows. On Ezra's count, they fired simultaneously into the air. The sharp reports echoed off the mountain walls, and the wolves scattered. But not far. They regrouped at the edge of the clearing, pacing, waiting. They'll be back, Ezra said grimly. We need more firewood inside. Can't let the fire die, not even for a minute. The smoke and light are all that's keeping them at bay. They spent the next days in siege conditions. Ezra made dangerous runs to the woodpile while Emma stood guard with her rifle. Once, a wolf charged him as he loaded his arms with logs. Emma's shot, aimed at the ground near the animal, sent it veering away at the last second. Good shooting, he panted when he made it back inside. Steady under pressure. You've got the makings of a real mountain woman. She beamed at the praise, but worry creased her young face. The wood won't last forever. No, he agreed. But neither will their boldness. Storm's coming. They'll hole up, wait it out. We just need to outlast them. The storm hit that night with apocalyptic fury. The wind screamed like a living thing, driving snow horizontal past the windows. The cabin groaned and creaked under the assault. And more than once, Ezra feared the roof might tear away entirely. But it held. Mountain craftsmanship and stubborn determination kept the walls strong and the roof intact. Inside, they huddled close to the fire, wrapped in every blanket they owned. "Tell me about spring," Emma said through chattering teeth, "about when the flowers come." So Ezra talked. About meadows carpeted in columbine and Indian paintbrush. About streams swollen with snowmelt where fat trout practically jumped into your hands. About warm sun and gentle breezes and all the things that seemed impossible in the midst of winter's rage. Sometime past midnight, the wind began to ease. By dawn, an eerie silence had settled over the mountain. Ezra peered out to see a transformed landscape. Snow drifted to the eaves on one side of the cabin, the woodpile completely buried. "We need to dig out," he said. "Check the animals. Clear a path to the shed." They worked together through the day, Ezra breaking trail while Emma followed, helping where she could. The labor was exhausting, but it warmed their blood and lifted their spirits. No sign remained of the wolves save tracks filling with fresh snow. In the shed, they found Bessie the mule and the chickens had survived, though the birds looked bedraggled and miserable. Emma gathered eggs, only 2, but precious as gold in their situation, while Ezra forked out hay for Bessie. "She's getting thin," Emma observed, running her hand along the mule's ribs. "We all are, but we'll make it through. Always do." That night, as they ate their meager supper of rabbit stew and cornbread made with the last of their meal, Emma asked, "Were you ever scared during the storm?" Ezra considered lying, maintaining the image of invulnerable strength. But she deserved truth. "Yes, not for myself, but yes, because of me. Because I've got something to lose now. Makes a man vulnerable, caring about someone." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I was scared too, but not of the storm or the wolves." "What then?" "Of losing this, of something happening to you and being alone again." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Of going back to how things were." Ezra reached across the table and took her small hand in his massive one. "You listen to me, Emma. Long as I've got breath in my body, you've got a home. And if something does happen to me, which it won't, I'm too stubborn to die, but if it does, you know these mountains now. You know how to survive. You're not that scared little girl from the saloon anymore." "I'm still scared sometimes." "Being scared's not weakness. It's what you do when you're scared that counts. And you stood guard with wolves prowling. You kept your nerve in a blizzard that would send grown men crying for their mothers. You're brave, Emma, braver than you know." The weeks that followed tested that bravery. Food grew scarcer. They were down to 2 meals a day. Then 1. Ezra gave Emma the lion's share. Ignoring her protests, his clothes hung loose on his frame, but he kept his concerns hidden. Then came the morning when he collapsed checking the trap lines. One moment he was upright, the next face down in the snow, the world spinning. Hunger and cold had finally taken their toll. He might have died there, another frozen corpse for spring to uncover, if not for Emma. She'd followed him, against his orders, worried by his increasing weakness. Small as she was, she managed to get him back to the cabin, half dragging, half supporting him through the snow. "Stubborn girl," he mumbled as she got him inside and to the fire. "Learn from the best," she replied, fear making her voice sharp. She made pine needle tea, forced him to drink, fed him tiny portions of their remaining food, ignoring her own empty stomach. For 2 days, she nursed him while the snow fell steadily outside. When his fever finally broke, when clarity returned to his eyes, he found her curled beside him on the floor, standing guard even in exhaustion. She'd used her own blankets to keep him warm, leaving herself with only her thin coat. "Emma," he touched her shoulder gently. "Emma, wake up." She jerked awake, immediately checking him for signs of fever. "You're better. Thanks to you, but you need to eat. Get warm." "I'm fine." "No," he said firmly. "We take care of each other. That's how this works. Spring, when it finally came, felt like a miracle. The first trickle of snowmelt, the first green shoot pushing through the white, the first bird song, each small sign of renewal was celebrated. They were thinner, worn down by the hard winter, but they'd survived. More than that, they'd proven something to each other and themselves, in facing starvation and cold and predators, in saving each other's lives. They'd forged a bond stronger than blood. "We did it," Emma said one morning, standing in the doorway, breathing in air that no longer hurt her lungs. "We did," Ezra agreed. "Hardest winter I can remember, and we came through. Together. As the trails cleared enough for travel, Ezra knew they'd soon have to face the world below again. The promised school attendance, the suspicious townspeople, all the complications of civilization awaited. But for now, they stood side by side in the doorway of their cabin, survivors of a trial by ice and wind, father and daughter in every way that mattered. The mountain had tested them and found them worthy. Whatever challenges waited in the valley, they would face those together too. Spring brought more than snowmelt and wildflowers to the mountain. It brought Jake Sullivan back to Copper Creek. Ezra first heard of his return during a supply run to town. The usual whispers that followed him through Morrison's store had a different quality. Excited, anticipatory, like vultures sensing carrion. "Sullivan's back," Morrison said as he tallied Ezra's purchases. "Been asking around about that transaction last fall. Says he was part of the original deal." Ezra's hand stilled on the counter. "What transaction?" "You know what I mean. The girl claims he had an understanding with Silas Kane before you stepped in. Kane sold his daughter for $20. I paid it." "That's the end of it." Morrison leaned closer, dropping his voice. "Maybe so, but Sullivan's telling a different story. Says Kane owed him money, promised him the girl as payment. Says you stole what was rightfully his. No man has a rightful claim to a child like property. I'm just telling you what he's saying. Thought you should know. He's been drinking heavy at the Broken Wheel, working himself up to something." Ezra left town quickly, his mind racing. He remembered Sullivan vaguely, a trader who dealt in goods of questionable origin, the sort of man who haunted the edges of frontier towns like a bad smell. That he'd been involved with Silas Kane surprised him not at all. When he reached the cabin, he found Emma practicing her letters on the porch, enjoying the warm spring sun. She looked up at his approach, her smile fading as she read his expression. "What's wrong?" "We might have trouble coming." He explained about Sullivan, watching her face pale with each word. "I won't let him near you, but you need to know, in case he shows up when I'm not here. The hiding places you showed me, use them if you need to. Don't hesitate. Don't try to be brave. You see him coming, you run and hide." For the next week, they maintained extra vigilance. Ezra kept the rifle loaded and within reach at all times. Emma stayed close to the cabin, her own small rifle never far from hand. But Sullivan didn't come. Instead, he worked more subtly. "Mr. Hawthorne?" The voice belonged to Reverend Collins from the church in town. He stood at the edge of the clearing with 2 other men, town councilmen. By their dress, "Reverend," Ezra stepped onto the porch, noting Emma's quick retreat inside. "What brings you up here?" "We need to discuss the child's situation. There have been allegations from Jake Sullivan, among others. He claims to have witnesses who heard Silas Kane promise the girl to him in payment for debts. Says you interfered in a legal transaction." "Legal?" Ezra's voice was dangerously quiet. "You're calling the sale of a child legal?" The Reverend shifted uncomfortably. "The circumstances were unfortunate, but frontier law recognizes certain arrangements. Indenture, apprenticeship. Slavery is what you mean. That's a strong word. Mr. Hawthorne, the point is, Mr. Sullivan has raised questions about the legitimacy of your guardianship. He's demanded a formal hearing. And if I refuse, one of the councilmen, a banker named Whitman, spoke up. Then we'll have to get the territorial marshal involved. Nobody wants that." Ezra understood the threat. A local hearing they might influence with truth and character witnesses. But territorial law was cold, distant, concerned only with paper and precedent. When? Saturday, 2 days hence, at the church. The Reverend paused. Bring the girl. They'll want to hear from her. After they left, Ezra found Emma pressed against the wall just inside the door, tears streaming down her face. I won't go with him, she said fiercely. I'll run away. I'll live in the caves. No. Ezra knelt before her, taking her small hands in his. We'll face this proper. Running makes us look guilty. We've done nothing wrong. But what if they believe him? What if... Then we'll deal with that when it comes. But I've got a feeling, Mr. Sullivan isn't as clever as he thinks. Saturday dawned clear and bright, mocking the darkness of their purpose. Ezra dressed in his best clothes, which weren't much, and helped Emma into the dress misses Patterson had made for her. Remember, he said as they prepared to leave. Tell the truth. Don't be scared of Sullivan or anyone else. I'll be right there. The church was packed when they arrived. It seemed every soul in Copper Creek had turned out for the spectacle. Sullivan sat in the front row, dressed in a new suit that didn't quite fit, a satisfied smirk on his florid face. Reverend Collins called the meeting to order. We're here to determine the proper guardianship of the child Emma. Mr. Sullivan, state your claim. Sullivan stood, hooking his thumbs in his vest. It's simple. Really. Silas Kane owed me $40 for goods advanced on credit. When he couldn't pay, we made an arrangement. The girl would work off the debt in my household. As what? Ezra interrupted. As a domestic. Cooking, cleaning, tending house, all proper and above board. And Kane agreed to this? He did. We shook on it. Would have collected her that very day, but I had business out of town. When I come back, I find she's been sold to another. That ain't right. The Reverend looked troubled. Do you have witnesses to this agreement? I do. Sullivan gestured to 2 men in the back. Rough characters Ezra recognized as Sullivan's sometime associates. Pete and Carl were there. Heard the whole thing. The 2 men nodded eagerly, clearly coached. Mr. Hawthorne? The Reverend turned to him. Your response? Ezra stood slowly. I was in the broken wheel when Kane tried to sell his daughter. He was drunk, desperate, offering her to anyone for $20. Nothing was said about prior arrangements or debts. Because he was trying to cheat me, Sullivan burst out. Trying to get money twice for the same goods. Goods? Emma's voice rang out clear and strong. Is that what I am? Goods? The room stirred uncomfortably. The Reverend gestured for her to come forward. Child, we need to hear your account. Emma walked to the front, her back straight despite the trembling Ezra could see in her hands. She looked directly at Sullivan, and something in her gaze made him shift uneasily. I know you, she said quietly. You used to come to our farm. You gave Papa whiskey, told him stories about getting rich quick. You're the reason he started drinking heavy. Now see here. You told him he could make fortune selling cheap goods to travelers. Gave him credit to buy from you. But the goods were poor quality. Watered whiskey, weevily flour, blankets that fell apart. Nobody would buy them. Sullivan's face reddened. That's business. Not my fault if... Then when he couldn't pay, you started coming around more. Looking at me, telling Papa how I could be useful, how girls my age were valuable in certain places. A gasp ran through the crowd. Several women pulled their children closer. She's lying, Sullivan sputtered. I never... You told him about houses in Denver, places where girls worked. You said I was pretty enough to fetch good money. Emma's voice remained steady, but tears ran down her cheeks. Papa said no at first, but you kept pushing, kept bringing whiskey, kept talking about how much money... Mr. Sullivan. The Reverend's voice was cold now. Is this true? Of course not. I'm a legitimate businessman. I wanted her for household work, nothing more. Emma turned to face the crowd. The day Mr. Hawthorne took me, I was glad, not because I knew him, but because I didn't know him. He was a stranger. But Mr. Sullivan, I knew exactly what he wanted. Prove it, Sullivan demanded. You can't prove any of these lies. I can. Every head turned as Sheriff Garrett walked in, leading a woman none of them had seen before. She was perhaps 30, worn-looking, dressed in traveling clothes. This is Mrs. Margaret Foster, the sheriff announced. From Denver. She has something relevant to say. The woman looked at Sullivan with undisguised hatred. That man sold me my daughter 3 years ago. Told me she was an orphan. Needed a good home. I found out later he'd bought her from her father for whiskey and trade goods. The church erupted. Sullivan tried to push toward the door, but men blocked his way. Where is she now? Someone asked. Mrs. Foster's voice broke. Dead. Took sick last winter. But before she died, she told me everything. About how Mr. Sullivan convinced her father she'd be better off. About the promises he made. About what he really intended before I intervened. This is all coincidence, Sullivan shouted. You can't prove. Pete, Carl? The sheriff looked at Sullivan's witnesses. You boys want to reconsider your testimony? Lying to a legal proceeding is serious business. The two men exchanged glances. Then Pete cleared his throat. Maybe we misremembered. Weren't actually there when Jake talked to Kane. You bastards! Sullivan lunged at them, only to be restrained. The Reverend raised his hand for silence. I think we've heard enough. All in favor of maintaining Mr. Hawthorne's guardianship? Every hand in the church rose except Sullivan's. And all in favor of running Mr. Sullivan out of town on the next available rail? The same hands rose, this time accompanied by angry murmurs that suggested Rail might be optimistic. As Sullivan was escorted out, still protesting, Emma ran to Ezra and threw her arms around his waist. He held her tight, feeling her shake with released tension. How? She whispered. Sheriff Garrett overheard. Your guardian here came to me after he heard Sullivan was back. We did some investigating, sent some telegrams. Mrs. Foster was already looking for Sullivan. Seems he's pulled this game in several towns. Is it over? Emma asked. It's over, Ezra assured her. Nobody's taking you anywhere. As they prepared to leave, townspeople approached them. Some offered apologies for doubting. Others simply nodded respectfully. Mrs. Patterson pressed a paper package into Emma's hands. Peppermint sticks and a new hair ribbon. Outside, in the spring sunshine. Emma looked up at Ezra. You knew, didn't you, about what Sullivan really was? I suspected. Men like that, they're a particular kind of evil. Prey on the desperate, the weak, but they always make mistakes, get greedy, leave a trail. Thank you. For what? For being smarter than him. For fighting for me. For... She paused, then finished in a rush. For being my papa. It was the first time she'd called him that directly. Ezra's throat tightened, and he had to clear it twice before speaking. Come on, Papa's girl, let's go home. They walked through town with heads high, no longer hermit and purchased child, but father and daughter in the eyes of all who mattered. Behind them. Sullivan's curses faded as the sheriff's men encouraged his departure with prejudice. The mountain road home had never seemed more welcoming. The Copper Creek Courthouse was a grand name for what amounted to a 2-story brick building with pretensions. But on this July morning, it held the weight of the territorial legal system, and Ezra felt every ounce of that weight pressing on his shoulders. The formal hearing had been called by Judge Samuel Thornton, a circuit judge known for his strict interpretation of law and general disregard for sentiment. Word of the case had spread beyond Copper Creek. A purchased child, a mountain hermit, questions of legal guardianship that touched on the very nature of family and rights in the territories. State your name for the record, the court clerk intoned. Ezra James Hawthorne. And you claim guardianship over the minor child, Emma? I do. Judge Thornton peered over his spectacles. On what grounds? On the grounds that I've cared for her, provided for her, protected her for the better part of a year now. On the grounds that her father sold her for drinking money, and I was the only one who stepped forward to prevent worse. The judge shuffled papers. I see here that you paid $20 for the child. You have a receipt? No receipt. It wasn't that kind of transaction. Then how can you prove the exchange took place legally? There were witnesses. The whole saloon saw it. Witnesses to a potentially illegal transaction. The buying and selling of human beings was outlawed. She wasn't a slave. Ezra interrupted, earning a sharp look from the judge. It was an arrangement for her care. An arrangement without documentation, without legal framework. Mr. Hawthorne, while your intentions may have been noble, the law requires more than good intentions. The prosecutor, brought in specially from the territorial capital, stood. Your Honor, the territory's position is that without proper legal documentation, Mr. Hawthorne has no more claim to the child than any other citizen, perhaps less, given the irregular nature of their association. And what does the territory propose? Judge Thornton asked. That the child be placed in the territorial orphanage until a proper family can be found, a married couple, with standing in the community. No! Emma's voice rang out from where she sat in the gallery. Please, Your Honor, I want to stay with Papa, with Mr. Hawthorne. The judge's gavel came down sharp. The child will remain silent unless called upon. Sheriff Garrett stood. Your Honor, might I speak to Mr. Hawthorne's character? Proceed. I've known Ezra Hawthorne for 5 years. He's a man of his word, honest in his dealings, skilled in mountain craft. More importantly, I've seen how he's raised this girl. She's educated, well-fed, properly clothed. She can read, write, figure numbers, handle firearms safely. Firearms? The prosecutor pounced. You're saying he's taught a young girl to use weapons? For protection, Garrett replied calmly. Mountain living requires it. Bears, wolves, the occasional unsavory character. The girl needs to defend herself when he's checking trap lines or hunting. Or perhaps, the prosecutor suggested, he's training her for a less savory life? A mountain bandit needs accomplices. Ezra surged to his feet. You dare! Mr. Hawthorne! The judge's gavel cracked again. You will control yourself or be removed from this courtroom. Ezra sank back, his fists clenched. Beside him, his appointed lawyer, a young man named Davidson, who looked overwhelmed, shuffled notes nervously. Call the next witness, the judge ordered. What followed was a parade of character witnesses. Mrs. Patterson testified about the clothes she'd made for Emma, how Ezra always paid promptly and inquired about proper sizes and styles for a growing girl. Morrison admitted that despite his initial suspicions, he'd seen nothing but proper behavior from the mountain man. Then came the opposition. The prosecutor had found people willing to testify to Ezra's isolation, his gruff manner, the irregularity of a single man raising a young girl. It's simply not natural, insisted Mrs. Hartley, Isaac's wife. A girl needs a woman's influence, a proper home, not some cabin in the wilderness. And have you visited this cabin? Davidson finally found his voice. Well, no, but everyone knows. So you have no first-hand knowledge of the conditions there? I don't need to see it to know it's improper. The morning wore on. Testimony piling upon testimony. Then, unexpectedly, a new voice spoke from the back of the courtroom. Your Honor, I request permission to address the court. All heads turned to see a well-dressed woman in her 50s, accompanied by a distinguished-looking man. Judge Thornton frowned. And you are? Dr. Marcus Webb, from Denver. This is my wife, Catherine. We've traveled here specifically for this hearing. On whose behalf? On behalf of the child. And truth, the judge considered, then nodded. Approach. Doctor. Webb helped his wife to the witness chair. She settled herself with dignity, then looked directly at Emma with eyes full of compassion. Your Honor, she began, 23 years ago, I lost my daughter. She was taken from our home in Kansas by raiders, sold to traders heading west. We searched for years, followed every lead, spent everything we had. The courtroom had gone silent, sensing something momentous. We never found her, but we found others, children bought and sold, working in conditions no better than slavery, some in households, some in worse places. always purchased under the guise of apprenticeship or domestic arrangement. What does this have to do with the current case? The judge asked, though his tone had softened. Everything. Your Honor, my husband and I have spent the last 15 years working to reunite such children with families or find them proper homes. We've seen what happens when the law prioritizes paperwork over welfare. She turned to look at Ezra. We heard about this case, about a man who paid $20 to save a girl from an uncertain fate. We investigated, Your Honor, spoke to people in surrounding towns, traced the movements of men like Jake Sullivan who traffic in human misery. Objection, the prosecutor called. Sullivan isn't on trial here. No, Mrs. Webb agreed. But the system that allows such men to operate is, Your Honor, we found 3 other girls Sullivan had arranged to purchase from desperate fathers. None survived their first year in his care. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Emma had gone pale, and Ezra reached out instinctively to comfort her before remembering they were separated by the courtroom arrangement. Furthermore, Doctor, Webb stood beside his wife. We offer an alternative to the territorial orphanage. If the court finds Mr. Hawthorne unsuitable, we formally petition to take guardianship of Emma ourselves. No! Emma was on her feet again, tears streaming. I won't go with anyone else. He's my papa. He saved me. Young lady, the judge began. Please let me speak. You've heard everyone else talk about what's best for me. Don't I get a say? Judge Thornton studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Approach the bench, child. Emma walked forward on trembling legs, but her voice was clear. Your Honor, I know Mr. Hawthorne isn't my real father. My real father sold me for whiskey money. But Papa, Mr. Hawthorne, he gave up almost everything he had to buy me. Not because he wanted a servant, or worse, because he couldn't stand to see what was happening. She took a shaky breath. He's taught me to read and write, to defend myself, to survive in the mountains. But more than that, he's shown me what a real father does. He went hungry so I could eat last winter. He cried when I asked if he'd sell me too. He stood between me and wolves, and between me and men like Sullivan. The judge leaned forward. You're saying you want to stay with him? I'm saying he's the only real family I've ever had. My birth father gave me away. Mr. Hawthorne fought to keep me. Which one deserves to be called Papa? In the silence that followed, more than one person wiped away tears. Even the prosecutor looked uncomfortable. Emma turned to face the Webbs. Thank you for offering. I can see you're good people, but I already have a home. It might just be a cabin in the mountains, but it's where I learned to be brave, where I learned I was worth saving. She looked back at the judge. If the law says that's not enough, if papers matter more than love, then the law is wrong, and I'll run away from any orphanage or proper home you put me in. I'll run back to the mountains, back to my papa, every single time. Judge Thornton removed his spectacles, cleaning them slowly. The entire courtroom held its breath. In my 20 years on the bench, he finally said, I've seen the law used to justify all manner of cruelty. I've seen children separated from loving homes because of technicalities, and I've seen them placed in proper situations that were anything but. He looked at Ezra. Mr. Hawthorne, you lack legal documentation. You're unmarried. You live in isolation. By all standard metrics, you're unsuitable as a guardian. Ezra's heart sank, but the judge continued. However, the law also recognizes that the welfare of the child must be paramount. This child is educated, healthy, skilled beyond her years in survival crafts. More importantly, she clearly loves and trusts you, and that trust appears well-founded. He turned to Emma. Young lady, your testimony was eloquent and moving. You've shown maturity beyond your years, no doubt shaped by hardship but also by good guidance. The gavel raised, and the courtroom held its breath. It is the judgment of this court that Ezra Hawthorne be granted full legal guardianship of the minor child Emma, with all rights and responsibilities therein. Furthermore, this court orders the creation of proper adoption papers, making this arrangement permanent and legally binding. The courtroom erupted, Emma flew into Ezra's arms, sobbing with relief. Well-wishers surrounded them, including the Webbs, who offered congratulations and an open invitation to visit, if ever in Denver. As they finally made their way outside, Emma clutching the official papers like treasure, Sheriff Garrett clapped Ezra on the shoulder. "Justice won today," he said simply. "No," Ezra replied, looking down at Emma. "Family won." They headed home as the sun began to set. No longer man and purchased child, but father and daughter in the eyes of God, man and law. The mountain trail had never looked more welcoming, leading them back to their cabin, their home, where two souls who'd found each other in the darkest of circumstances could continue building a life filled with light. The late afternoon sun painted the mountain peaks gold, a sight Ezra had witnessed countless times but which never failed to move him. What made this sunset different was the small figure beside him, her hand in his as they stood on the porch of their cabin, their home. 2 years had passed since the trial, 2 years of seasons changing, of growth and learning, of a bond that had transformed from desperate necessity into unshakable love. Emma was 11 now, taller and stronger, her face losing some of its childish roundness but none of its determination. "Papa," she said, breaking their comfortable silence. "Tell me about Mama and Sarah again." It was a ritual between them now. Where once the memories had been too painful to voice, now they were shared treasures, keeping the lost alive in story and remembrance. "Your Mama Mary could make the finest biscuits in 3 counties, Ezra began, settling into his chair. "Light as clouds, golden brown. She'd sing while she cooked, hymns mostly, but sometimes old mountain songs her grandmother taught her. And Sarah loved those biscuits something fierce, would sit in her high chair, banging her spoon and laughing. Got more in her face than in her belly most times." He smiled at the memory. "She had your spirit. Emma, fearless, once crawled clear across the cabin chasing a butterfly that got inside." Emma leaned against his knee, content. These stories of the family that came before had become part of her own history, weaving her into a continuity of love that transcended blood. "I wish I could have met them," she said softly. "They'd have loved you," Ezra assured her. "Mary always wanted more children. Said a house wasn't proper full with just one young'un making noise." "Am I enough noise for you?" he chuckled, ruffling her hair. "Some days you're a whole passel of children worth of noise." The evening routine unfolded with practiced ease. Emma prepared their simple supper while Ezra tended the animals. They ate by lamplight, discussing the next day's chores, the books they were reading, the approach of winter and what it would demand. "I've been thinking," Emma said as she cleared the dishes, "about what Mrs. Patterson said last week, about the teaching position." Ezra looked up sharply. The seamstress had mentioned that Copper Creek schoolmarm was leaving, marrying a rancher from Nevada. They needed someone educated to take her place, and Emma, despite her youth, had shown remarkable aptitude. "You're too young for such responsibility," he said automatically. "I could assist, help with the little ones, teach basic letters while someone else handles the older students." She turned to face him, her blue eyes earnest. "I want to help other children. Papa, children like I was." This about giving back, or about spending more time in town? She considered the question seriously, another sign of her growing maturity. "Both. Maybe. I love our mountain, love our life here. But sometimes I think about other children who aren't as lucky as I am now, who need someone to see them, to help them." Ezra felt his chest tighten with pride and something like fear. His little girl was growing up, developing her own dreams and purposes. The selfish part of him wanted to keep her here forever, safe in their mountain sanctuary, but he'd raised her to be strong and independent. How could he clip her wings now? "We'll think on it," he said finally. "Winter's coming, plenty of time to decide come spring." That night, as had become their custom, they sat by the fire while Emma read aloud. She'd progressed far beyond the simple primers, now working through Pilgrim's Progress with careful pronunciation and growing understanding. "Now I saw in my dream," she read. that the highway up which Christian was to go was fenced on either side with a wall, and that wall was called salvation. Ezra listened, mending a harness by feel. His attention split between the familiar words and the miracle of hearing them in Emma's clear voice. How many evenings had Mary read this same passage while he worked and baby Sarah slept? A knock at the door interrupted the reading. Ezra tensed. Visitors after dark were rare and rarely brought good news. He motioned Emma to stay put while he answered, rifle close at hand. Sheriff Garrett stood on the porch, hat in hand, his face grave. "Ezra, sorry to disturb your evening." "Sheriff, what brings you up here?" "Need to speak with you, both of you. It's about Silas Kane." Emma appeared at Ezra's elbow. "My father? My birth father?" Garrett nodded. "He's dead." "Emma, found him froze to death outside Wickenburg. Been living rough since that day. Thought you should know." Emma's face went through a series of emotions. Shock, sadness, something that might have been relief. "How long?" "Week, maybe 2. Took time to identify him. Tracked down next of kin, which, legally speaking, is you." "I don't want anything from him," Emma said quickly. "Wasn't much to want, but there was this." Garrett pulled out a worn envelope. "Letter he was carrying, addressed to you." Emma took it with trembling fingers but didn't open it. "Thank you for bringing it." After the sheriff left, they sat in silence for a long while. The letter lay on the table between them like an unexploded shell. "You don't have to read it," Ezra said finally. "I know." She picked it up, turned it over. "But I think I need to—" With careful fingers, she broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet. Her eyes moved across the scrawled words, tears starting to fall. "What does it say?" Ezra asked gently. She handed it to him wordlessly. The writing was barely legible, whiskey shaken and cold cramped. "Emma, girl, I know I got no right to words from me. What I done was unforgivable. Your mama would curse me from heaven if she knew. I told myself it was for your own good, but truth is, I was a coward and a drunk, and I sold my own blood for bottle money. I hear you're with the mountain man Hawthorne now. Hear he's raising you proper. That's good. Better than I could done. I pray someday you can forgive, but I understand if you can't. I couldn't forgive myself. Tell Hawthorne thank you for being the father I should have been. You're no good, Papa." Silas Emma was sobbing now, and Ezra pulled her into his arms. "It's all right," he murmured. "Let it out." "I hate him," she whispered fiercely. "But I'm sad he's dead. Does that make sense?" "Makes perfect sense. He was your father, good or bad. It's natural to mourn what was and what might have been." They held each other as the fire burned low. Two survivors bound by choice rather than blood, by love rather than law. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, blanketing the harsh mountain landscape in forgiving white. Later, as Emma prepared for bed, she paused at the mantel where Ezra kept his few treasures, a daguerreotype of Mary and Sarah, his father's watch, the adoption papers from the judge. "Papa, could we put his letter here? Not because I forgive him, but because it's part of my story. Your story's yours to tell however you want," Ezra said. She placed the letter carefully beside the other mementos. "He gave me away, but that brought me to you. Maybe that's the only good thing he ever did, but it was enough." The next morning dawned crystal clear, the new snow sparkling like diamonds. Emma was up early, eager to check her trap lines before the snow got too deep. Ezra watched her move confidently through the drifts, rifle slung over her shoulder. Every inch the mountain child he'd trained her to be, but she was more than that now. She was educated, compassionate, strong in ways that had nothing to do with physical prowess. She was his daughter in every way that mattered, but she was also her own person, with dreams that might one day lead her beyond these peaks. "Papa," she called from the tree line. "Fresh elk tracks. Want to hunt?" "Coming," he called back, reaching for his rifle. They spent the morning tracking through the pristine snow, Emma reading signs as well as any mountain man. They didn't get an elk, but they didn't really need one. The companionship, the shared purpose, the simple joy of being together in the wilderness they both loved. That was the real prize. As they headed home, Emma slipped her hand into his. "Papa, thank you." "For what?" "For seeing me that day in the saloon. For knowing I was worth $20. "You're worth everything I had and more," he said gruffly. "Always were. Just took me finding you to remember what mattered." They crested the ridge above their cabin, and there it stood, smoke rising from the chimney, afternoon sun warming its walls. It wasn't fancy, wasn't proper by town standards, but it was home. It was where a broken man and a throwaway child had built something beautiful from the ashes of their losses. "Race you back," Emma suddenly challenged, taking off through the snow with a laugh. Ezra chased after her, his own laughter echoing off the mountains. The sound would have astonished anyone who'd known the grim hermit of 3 years ago. But that man was as dead as Silas Cain, transformed by the love of a child who'd taught him that family wasn't about blood or documents. Family was about choosing each other, again and again, through winter storms and wolf packs, through trials and triumphs. Family was a gruff mountain man teaching a scared little girl to be brave. Family was that same girl teaching him to hope again. As they tumbled through the cabin door, breathless and covered in snow, Ezra looked at Emma, his daughter, his redemption, his unexpected blessing, and knew that he was the richest man in Colorado territory, not in gold or land, but in the currency that truly mattered. He was loved, he was needed, he was Papa, and in a harsh world that too often priced children like commodities, that was worth more than all the gold in the mountains. The sun set behind the peaks, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Inside the cabin, father and daughter settled into their evening routine, chores and supper, reading and conversation, the simple rhythms of a life built on mutual trust and hard-won love. Outside, the mountains stood eternal guard. Inside, two hearts that had found each other in the darkest of places continued to build their light. Thank you for listening to this story of hope born from despair, of family forged in the crucible of the frontier. If you're enjoying these tales from the Old West, please let us know where you're listening from. We love connecting with fellow admirers of Western stories across the globe. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Ezra and Emma's journey in the comments below. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful stories of the American frontier to life.